In 1933, a writer sat down and created one of America's most iconic heroes, a masked lawman, a white man on a white horse, a legend. But here's the truth they never wanted you to know. That character was stolen. He was based on a real man, a black man, a man who was 10 times more fearless, 10 times more legendary, and 10 times more dangerous than anything Hollywood ever dared to show you. His name was Bass Reeves, and his story was erased.
Mr. Stark here, and today we're uncovering one of America's greatest historical cover-ups. A story of a man who hunted down over 3,000 outlaws across the deadliest frontier in American history. A story of courage, justice, and a truth that changes everything you thought you knew about the Wild West.
Let's go back, way back, to Arkansas, 1838. A child is born into slavery on a plantation. His name is Bass Reeves. He grows up in chains, watching the world through the lens of powerlessness. But something inside him was different, something unbreakable. During the Civil War, Reeves escapes to Indian Territory, what we now call Oklahoma. He lives among the Seminoles and Creek nations for years, learning their ways, learning the land, learning how to survive in places where law didn't exist. And then in 1875, when he's nearly 40 years old, something changes. A judge named Isaac Parker, a man determined to bring order to the lawless frontier, hires Reeves as a U.S. Marshal. But here's where it gets wild. Reeves wasn't just any marshal. He was black, in post-Civil War America, in the Wild West. Think about that for a second. The odds against him weren't just stacked, they were impossible. So why did the judge hire him? Because Reeves had one superpower that no white marshal could match. He could blend in. He could infiltrate outlaw hideouts without suspicion, and he was absolutely relentless.
Judge Parker gave Reeves an impossible assignment: patrol 75,000 square miles of the Indian Territory, alone, to capture the worst criminals in America. Murderers, outlaws, gang members, all of them more desperate and more dangerous than anything most people can imagine. But Reeves didn't just patrol. He hunted, he tracked, he pursued criminals across state lines, through dense forests, across rivers, through territories where even experienced scouts got lost. And the craziest part? He was incredibly successful. By 1878, just 3 years into his job, Reeves had already captured over 100 dangerous criminals. By 1880, that number was 200. By 1990, he'd arrested over 1,000 outlaws. By the time he retired in 1907, Reeves had personally captured or killed more than 3,000 criminals. 3,000! To put that in perspective, most legendary Old West marshals captured maybe a few hundred. Reeves didn't just outwork them, he outworked them by orders of magnitude. But there's something even crazier. In all those years hunting the most dangerous people in America, Reeves was shot at countless times. His clothes were torn by bullets. He survived assassination attempts. And yet, in his entire career, he may have been wounded only twice. How does that happen? How does one man survive that? Bass Reeves became a ghost story on the frontier. Outlaws would literally flee when they heard his name. Gangs would dissolve. Murderers would turn themselves in rather than face him. He tracked a man named Cherokee Bill across 3 territories. He cornered the James family cousins, yeah, that family, and brought them in. He hunted down a man named Tom Story who'd murdered a deputy, and he brought him back alive. Even though every other lawman said it was a suicide mission, the stories about him grew. He could shoot coins out of the air. He could track a man across solid rock. He could shoot with either hand. He could survive anything. And here's the thing, most of those stories were true. But in 1883, something happened that changed everything. A writer named Fenton Todd was visiting Fort Worth, Texas. He heard the stories, the incredible, impossible stories, the legend of a fearless lawman who couldn't be stopped, and he became obsessed. So he wrote a story, a serialized pulp fiction story about a masked lawman on a white horse who fought for justice in the Wild West.
A lawman who was quick with a gun, clever with his mind, and impossible to defeat. He called the character the Lone Ranger. But here's what Todd left out. He changed one crucial detail. In his version, the lawman was white. The legend of Bass Reeves was stolen, whitewashed, and repackaged as American mythology.
Now, we can't say for certain that Fenton Todd consciously stole Bass Reeves' story. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But what we know is this: the character he created matched Reeves in almost every way. The hunting skills, the courage, the relentless pursuit of justice, the way outlaws feared him, the way he operated in lawless territories, the way he brought order where chaos existed. The only difference was the skin color. And so, for over a century, millions of Americans grew up with the Lone Ranger. They read the comics, they watched the radio shows, they watched the TV series in the 1950s starring Clayton Moore, they watched the movies, they bought the toys, they dressed up as him for Halloween. Meanwhile, the real man, the actual legend, was completely forgotten. Bass Reeves' name disappeared from history books. His story wasn't taught in schools. His incredible achievements were erased. Even Western historians, who should have known better, forgot about him. Why? Because in America, the real story of a fearless black man didn't fit the narrative. It was too powerful, too challenging, too real. So it was easier to steal the story and give it to someone else, someone more acceptable to mainstream America. But that's not justice. That's theft. But here's where the story gets better. In the last 15 years, historians and researchers started digging. They started connecting the dots. They started finding Bass Reeves' name in old documents, old court records, old newspaper articles from the 1880s and 1890s. And slowly, the truth started coming back. In 2023, Paramount Plus released a series called Bass Reeves, starring David Oyelowo. Suddenly, millions of people discovered the real story, the real legend, and the response was overwhelming. People were angry. People were moved. People realized what had been taken from history. Because Bass Reeves' story isn't just important for Black history. It's important for all American history. It shows us that the Wild West wasn't just about white settlers and sheriffs. It was built by people of all backgrounds, people of incredible courage, people whose stories were silenced. Bass Reeves represents something deeper. He represents the truth that the greatest American heroes have often been the ones society tried hardest to forget. He represents the idea that one man, despite the odds, despite the racism, despite the danger, can change the world. He represents justice, real justice, not the sanitized, comfortable version, but the messy, dangerous, uncompromising version. You know, when I first learned about Bass Reeves, I felt angry. Angry that his story was stolen. Angry that I, like millions of other Americans, grew up with the Lone Ranger and never knew the real legend behind it. But then I realized something more important. This story isn't really about one man being forgotten. It's about all the stories we've forgotten. All the heroes who were written out of history because they didn't fit someone's idea of what America should look like. Bass Reeves reminds us that the truth always has power. Maybe it takes 100 years. Maybe it takes decades of work by historians and researchers and storytellers, but the truth comes back. The real stories come back, and when they do, they're more powerful than any fiction. That's the lesson. That's why Bass Reeves matters, because in remembering him, we remember all the others, and we remember that American greatness didn't come from one type of person or one type of story. It came from courage. It came from people willing to stand alone. It came from legends like Bass Reeves, who refused to be erased.
So here's what I want you to do. Share this story. Tell someone today about Bass Reeves. Tell them about the real Lone Ranger. Tell them about the legend that was stolen and the truth that came back. Because history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's something we create right now, in this moment, by choosing what we remember and what we tell. Bass Reeves deserves to be remembered, not as a footnote, not as a correction to someone else's story, but as exactly what he was, a true American legend. If you want to learn more, I'll have links in the description. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you angry or inspired, please like this video and subscribe, because we're going to keep telling the stories that matter, the true stories, the stories of real heroes. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.